America, and welcome to Happy Hour with Maestro Tim. I am said Maestro Tim, and today I have a very special guest. He's a former employer of mine, my former boss, Maestro Micheal Stern, music director of the Kansas City Symphony, and he's just been very gracious enough to share some of his time with me today. Hello, calling all the way from what, Connecticut?
Connecticut.
Connecticut. Hello, Mr. Micheal Stern. How are you?
Hello.
Cheers to you. So let's go straight to business. What are you drinking?
I'm drinking an old-fashioned, and you're at 5 o'clock, right? Or are you 4 o'clock? You're 5 o'clock.
I'm at 5 o'clock, yep.
Okay, so you're just right on the cusp of cocktail hour.
That's why we chose this hour. So what's your secret ingredient? What do you do specially for your cocktail of choice?
Well, the bourbon is good.
Yep.
It has to be good.
What kind?
This
Today.
one is Larceny, actually. Not bad. Usually Angel's Envy. Or something, not Pappy Winkles. You wouldn't want to waste that on it. I don't know. These are COVID times.
Right, yeah.
You do what you got to do.
We in Iowa, this may come as a surprise to you, we actually grow corn here. So I'm thinking,
Really, I hadn't heard.
I know, so why not? Here's an idea, let's drink it. So anyhow, just before we went on air, you asked me, so what is this all about? Well, I've had guests like yourself come on, talk about various things. We're going to eventually get into the pandemic a little bit, but ultimately what I'd really like for you to talk about is your story with the Kansas City Symphony. You've been there for many years now, and you came just as I was leaving. And to be able to see what you've done over that period of time has been remarkable. So I just would want to talk about, the various points that really took your organization to the next level. But before we get that, I want to start with your book, because one of the last things you did for me is you signed your book, and I have it here. Darren, if you could put a tight shot on here. Your book about Max Rudolph, teacher of yours. Tell me a little bit. University of Iowa is about 30 minutes south of here, and I know there's a couple of conducting students who are watching this right now. So say a few words about Max Rudolph, why he was such a great mentor and a great conductor.
Well, I came to Max when he was already in his 80s. He was already so-called retired, although I was at the Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia, and he came back. He had led the conducting department 10 years earlier in the 70s. When I came in 1981, there was no conducting program, but he came back to the school in 1983 because I had been studying with him. So I spent 2 years at the school as a player without him, but studying privately, and then he came and I did a full degree with him at the school, and then I remained very close to him until he died. His original textbook, The Grammar of Conducting, which was originally published in 1950, and revised sometime in the 70s, was sorely in need of an update. And I co-edited that with him. And that was really a labor of love, because he really codified everything that he believed about music making, about conducting, about teaching. And so even though I had learned a great deal from him, I learned it all over again as we tried to articulate that in more coherent form for the third edition of his book. And then after he died, he was an inveterate letter writer. Yeah. And he had a musical correspondence, which was an entire library.
Don't you kind of miss that? I mean, we've lost that with texting and emails, because there's letters to Zell, letters to just like all the great luminaries of the 20th century.
That's right. And so I went through all of them. First of all, all the ones in English, all the ones in German, all the ones in French. He wrote in 3 languages. I opted to miss the ones in Swedish. He spoke that too, but I left it out. But when he's discussing Mozart tempi with Malcolm Frager, or Beethoven interpretation with George Zell, or he wrote articles all the time, and so did copious research for those articles, and all of that was in his library, which I inherited. He gave me his library, which, as a performing musician, you'll appreciate that it was thousands of scores. So I felt very lucky, and I felt the least I could do is to bring some of this wisdom together in, even though it was posthumous, a collected edition of his letters, which I think articles and letters. You know, I think about this when I teach. I don't do. Tim, do you teach at all? Do you?
Rarely, occasionally, yeah.
But even when you're trying to motivate young people, whether you're working with a young orchestra or whether you're just talking to them or coaching, there has to be, in music making, there has to be order and control and reason, and then all of that has to go away, and there can only be unabashed abandon. So the ideal performance is one which is really coherently understood, thought out, digested, imagined, and it sounds like you're improvising.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that he did very, very well. So he knew everything. He was not a showman, and I think that in the in his orbit of colleagues, you know, which were all the greats, it was Bruno Walter and Fritz Reiner and George Zell and Metropolis and all the people. He ran the Metropolitan Opera in New York for 14 years with Rudolph Bing, and he engaged all those people.
Right.
And he conducted, I don't know how many hundreds of performances, and he went on tour with the Met, and he knew everything about opera, he knew everything about symphony orchestras, but he managed to synthesize all of that in a way which was utterly unglamorous. And that was probably his one Achilles heel. That at an era where people like Leonard Bernstein and later Tommy Shippers and people who were more flamboyant were becoming more television worthy, he was decidedly not that.
Right.
But I have in mind always what he accomplished in Cincinnati, because he took a really not very good orchestra and turned it into one of America's greatest orchestras. And that was his legacy.
What was he like as a person? I mean, was he old school? Was he severe? Was he warm? Was he? Because
He was slightly centuries older than old school.
Yeah, because it's clearly when you flip through this book, I mean, the rigor there is impressive to say the least.
Yes, but the rigor was not didactic.
Right.
It was not stuck in his ways. He was unbelievably progressive. He was unbelievably open. He was very patient until he wasn't. And then you knew how Teutonic he was.
Right.
He was an agnostic Jew with a huge cultural spirituality. He used to say that his spiritual fathers were Goethe, Mozart, and Sigmund Freud. That should tell you almost all you need to know about him. But I loved him dearly. I was close to his family. I used to go over, I mean, he had ritual. He was very set in his ways. He was set in his ways in music, and he was set in his ways. Came over for lunch. He always had his wife put the carton of Breyer's ice cream on the heater in the winter so that by the time we got to dessert, it was literally bouillon. And he would always take every afternoon and every evening one charcoal pill because it helped with digestion. And he was just like, he was extremely orderly.
Do you find that you see? I'm going somewhere with this. Every day I look in the mirror and I look like my dad more and more, and it's alarming me. Do you find that in rehearsal or in performance, every once in a while you say or do something and you realize you're channeling him?
100%. Well, him and a few other people.
Yeah.
The people who had a huge impact on my life, and it comes back at the most unexpected moment, right? So
Yeah.
there are certain pieces that I learned with him which are so ingrained in me. Brahms' Second Symphony is one. Schubert Unfinished is one. The Eroica is one. The way his take on certain things about tempo and phrasing and bowing and whatever it was, the opening of the Beethoven Sixth Symphony. I cannot do the opening of Beethoven Sixth without thinking of him, which actually makes me happy because he did Beethoven Sixth very well.
Right. What didn't he do well?
He did not do Aaron Copland's music well.
God bless him.
He was allergic to Aaron Copland's music. He said, I don't understand why this man is as famous as he is. But you have to understand that when he came to me one time in a lesson, this was when I was at Curtis and I'm on the podium, and he came up to me and he sort of stops me. We were doing, I think, the Brahms Tragic Overture in class with a student orchestra to practice on. And he stops me, he holds my arm. And he's just shaking his head. I must have been doing literally everything wrong. And he looks at me, and then he looks at the orchestra, and he says, you see what the problem is with you young people. You think that life can be happy. You just haven't learned yet that life is a tragedy. Go on.
True fun at parties, he must have been, yes.
That was a little bit of a downer. But then, in a private lesson, he said to me, yeah, when you're young, you think Brahms is it, but then you realize it's Bruckner. So, a guy who likes that is not going to really embrace Aaron Copland.
Right, got it. Yep, for sure. Hey, listen, I'm going to...
I mean, he was good with Stravinsky. He wasn't particularly good with, Gershwin.
Sure. Yeah, that's not his heritage. That's not where he came from. Not born in this country, correct?
Definitely not. No, he was not. He was born in Germany in 1902, and I mean, his first composition teacher, played in an orchestra under Brahms.
Oh my God.
So that gives you an idea of the lineage.
Right. Yeah.
His hometown conductor growing up was Furtwängler.
Wow.
Yeah, he was born in Frankfurt.
Oh my God. Yeah.
But then he went from Germany. He escaped the war early, went to Sweden, went first to Prague, then to Sweden, and then came to America and learned all of those languages. He spoke a little Czech, he spoke Swedish fluently, German, of course, French perfectly, and his English, while heavily accented, was incredibly poetic. Beautiful.
Wow.
One last thing about Rudolph, and then we can talk about something else, but this, to me, epitomizes what I loved best about him and his character, which was he came to this country and he was really broke. And he had 2 small children and was trying to make a living. He had been a music director of the Prague Opera. He'd been an important guy in Germany, in Sweden, in Czechoslovakia. And he was trying to make ends meet, so he was giving private piano lessons and teaching music appreciation at the local YMCA. And his wife's cousin, who had fled the Nazis in some other way and had ended up in Cleveland, Ohio, said, there's an opening. Apparently the music director of the Cleveland Orchestra, Eric Leinsdorf, had gotten drafted into the Army and would no longer be the music director in Cleveland. And they said they were looking for a chief conductor. You should put your name in. And the orchestra already had a reputation because they had been led by Artur Rodzinski and other people. And he said, I would be a very good music director, but I'm not a genius. My closest friend, he was colleagues with George Zell in Prague. My closest friend is George Zell, who is in New York without a job, and this doesn't make sense to me.
Wow.
If you want to get a genius for the Cleveland Orchestra, you should look at George Zell. Wow. This was a guy who was so in need of employment, and yet, so that says a lot about his character.
Oh my God, it sure does. I'm going to check our chat room to see what kind of activities there, if there's anybody who's asking questions for you to answer, or see what other things, I forgot to update this here. See what other cocktails people are drinking. Let's see here.
He and other people.
Let's see here. Randy Reynolds, he's drinking a heavy lime Cosmo. Good for you. Jeanette
Nice.
Welch, yeah, excellent. Kathy Varney, good evening. White Sauvignon Blanc here.
Nice.
Let's see here. Patty Thacker, what delightful treat. Serving us dessert before dinner. Thank you for filling our hearts and spirits with such unspeakable joy. You know, you have that effect on people, Michael. Good for you.
Do I?
You do, absolutely.
Maybe it's the Cosmo or the Sauvignon Blanc. I don't know. Very good music director.
Anyway, see what other cocktails people are drinking. Keep the comments coming, and we'll get back if you have any particular questions for Michael.
I can't see the chat. Only you can see the chat.
Only I can see them, so I'm actually,
look at that
I'm editing
control.
them as we go, so here we go. Yeah, I'm having a hard time getting back to Zoom. Here we go. So anyway, let's talk Kansas City, because that's where our paths crossed.
Yeah.
And you know, when you're going through, when you have a long tenure, sometimes change can feel glacial. But I've been cheering you on from the sidelines for all these years, and I got to tell you that the transformation you've done in Kansas City is remarkable. So let's go back in time and talk about the orchestra as you first met them before your journey together, and what were some of your assessments of what needed to happen with that organization when you were first hired?
Well, that's a big question, because when I first came to Kansas City, I didn't even know that there was a search going on. I just came to replace the then music director, Ann Manson, who was at the end of, I think, a difficult pregnancy, if I remember, and had to pull out of a concert. And it had been a busy month for me, and I wasn't really looking to take anything else on. But I didn't have children at that time, and I wasn't married. I was between marriages, and I figured, okay, I didn't know anything about Kansas City. The reason I was intrigued was not because of the orchestra, truth be told, but because the program included the world premiere of a cello concerto by Ned Rorem.
I remember that. Yes, yeah.
The cellist was very famous from Europe. I had worked with him in Germany. I'm a big American music guy, so world premiere by a guy that I knew. Ned Rorem was on the faculty of Curtis when I was a student. And my father had known him professionally for years before, and blah, blah, blah. And then I took the program intact. I think she had Stravinsky Firebird and an early Beethoven symphony, I think number 1. So I went to Kansas City with no expectations, and I found a very sloppy, unhappy bunch of people who clearly wanted to be happy. But actually, if I can make a side comment, I think in the heart of all real musicians beats the desire to make great music and be happy. Nobody wants to get up in the morning and not feel fulfilled or not feel. And so I just thought, well, all right, let's just roll up our sleeves and rehearse. First rehearsal was rough, I will say that. It got really substantially better really quickly. So I thought, it's too bad. This orchestra, like every other orchestra with great people who just love music, could be something great.
Yeah.
And then sort of midway through the week, Frank Byrne told me that Shirley Hellsberg wanted to take me out to dinner. I did not know Shirley Hellsberg. I now know
for our viewing public, that's Helzberg Diamonds, Shirley Hellsberg.
Well, it was Shirley, yes. Shirley Hellsberg is married
to
still,
Barnett.
To Barnett Hellsberg, whose father founded Hellsberg Diamonds. But more tellingly, she was the chairman of the board.
Right.
And I was a regular participant at the Aspen Music Festival, and she was on the board of the Aspen Music Festival as well, but I had not crossed her path. So now I meet her, and from that moment on started this relationship, which was incredibly close. I mean, I feel part of that family now. But she was the one who told me that they were looking for a music director. And I thought, Okay, I'm not going to take it. I had just come off a tenure as a music director in Germany, and like I said, my marriage had ended or was about to end, and it was just not a great moment for me. And so I come to this orchestra and I see that there are all these problems. There's a huge deficit, but because of her generosity and her incredible fundraising, she could make it up. But there were, the hall was not full. The auditorium where they played was not very good. You remember the Lyric Theater?
Oh, I know. Yeah. I hear that they've torn it down.
They have.
Yeah.
Well, no, the
Or
building still is
the
there.
facade
They've
is still
gutted
there.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just as an aside, because I was born and bred in New York, I live in Connecticut, but in New York, $600,000 doesn't get you a closet, right?
Yeah.
And you're talking about housing prices across the market. It's insane. Now it's a little bit less because of various things that happened in the last 15 months, but apartments for 30, 40, 50 million dollars. $1 million is a normal price to pay for a 2-bedroom apartment.
Wow.
They
Yeah.
sold the
Sure.
Lyric Theater, the entire building, for $1 million.
That's it?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Wow.
It makes me laugh because I think they're turning it into a gym or maybe into a hotel. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
It was not a good place. That's bottom line.
it was a dysfunctional place.
Yeah.
And it was a place where management was really bad. The attitude that the musicians had was very much us against them. The salary was abysmally low.
Yep.
And I just was in complete awe of the fact that Shirley, when she became chairman of the board, had said, I'm going to be trying. She didn't do anything for 6 months. All she did was listen to everybody. Mm-hmm. And then she said, we're not going to make this place better unless we change the culture.
Yeah.
She made that her mission statement. And she called the musicians together saying, I'm throwing out the contract. And, you say that to a bunch of musicians and people go, oh my goodness, they're going to try to squeeze us more. And she said, you cannot exist like this. This is an inhuman way to treat people. We're going to double your salaries. What do you do when someone tells you
Yeah, that's a pretty good way.
And that was at the very, very, very beginning. But then when I came in, I was lucky enough to work with Frank Byrne, who had been the general manager and was elevated to the position of executive director. And over time, with an incredibly consistent effort, especially an effort from Frank, I will say, more than from me, in the very narrow way of trying to identify new board members, changing the makeup of the board, changing the attitude of how we approach the culture of the place. It didn't take long. I came on, my designate year was 2000, I was chosen in 2004-05. Designate year was 5-6. I started for real in September of 2006. And then things got more and more trusting incredibly quickly. They trusted me on stage, I trusted them on stage. All of our audition process led to some really good hires. The way the management grew with really good people. Some people left, some people came on, really good fits. And then the board evolved. And now we have this climate of incredible trust and loyalty and devotion to one another. It makes everything else easy. So it's not to say that there is no disagreement ever.
Of course not, yeah.
But there never is any starting point which is not, we are going to fix this. Let's just sit down and we'll figure it out. And it's not like, oh, there's a problem. It's like, oh, we noticed that this needs to be worked out. Let's figure it out.
Right.
Here's a case in point. The last 2 contracts that the orchestra negotiated were done without lawyers in the room. You
Nice.
tell me when the last time the New York Philharmonic did that.
Yeah, that doesn't happen very often. Yeah.
So I feel very fortunate. We also work very hard on stage. Musically, the orchestra gets better and better. And now I've signed my last contract. They did ask me to extend a year, which I will do because I always said whenever it was that I was leaving, I said this in my 4th or 5th year, whenever I would leave the orchestra, I wanted to be better than it was. I still feel that way. I'm devoted to those people. They are my friends. They are my colleagues. I love the community. I feel close to them. I know that they feel close to us. I've got nothing but support from them, and I owe them that fidelity, but I also owe the art of music that devotion. So I'll stay an extra year. We will have a really well done search. We will turn the page to the next chapter without missing a beat. And there it is. And we're also one of the most financially stable orchestras in the United States.
See, that's a miracle because when I was there, I mean, it was just a basket case in financially. I'm going to go back to our chat room and see what's going on there. When I get back, I want to talk to you about your new hall, or sort of new hall now. And
it's been 10 years.
Yeah. Because it was interesting, because the goalposts always seem to be moving on that. Well, when I get back, I wanted to ask you about some of the challenges of getting ready for a new hall. Okay, what's going on in our chat room here? Mike Foch is drinking gin and tonic, always a great... Mike actually asks you, what is your greatest fear when conducting? Michael.
My greatest fear is not being in the music. But it rarely happens. I mean, we all make mistakes, but if you study properly and you're in the music, you can't get nervous. If you're somehow not sure of why you're taking the next step, then you get nervous.
I usually get nervous during the rehearsals because that's where the work gets done. Usually by performance, it's like, if the work has been done, it's quite a joy. Do you find that at all?
I think without doing the work, you cannot be true to yourself.
Yeah, true that. So let's go back. So the next, to my way of thinking, I mean, the next great milestone was getting a truly dedicated symphony hall. And that is something that can be both a boon, but also a great challenge, because a great hall both flatters and reveals who you are. So what were some of the challenges getting the orchestra ready for a new concert hall, a world-class, greatly acoustically tuned room?
Well, we had to learn how to play in the hall, first of all, because, as you know, the lyric posed, how shall I say this politely? Challenges.
Yeah, it was a pig. Yeah.
Without the lipstick. It was a really difficult place to play. And it was, so I don't believe that concerts are entertainment. I believe that they should be an experience. And when you come into Hellsberg Hall, it's not just that it's a palace of music, but that seems off-putting because, normal people are not always welcome into palaces. This is a palace for everybody. And when I say palace, it's like this shrine of music, but also it's incredibly accessible. It just invites you in. The Lyric Theater was not inviting for the public. The experience of being there was not great for the public. The experience of being on stage was not great. Being backstage was, you felt you had to shower afterwards because the place hadn't been vacuumed in 30 years.
Yep.
So
it also trained the orchestra just to play crudely and loud all the time. I mean, because that's the only way
you can't develop a sound. You can't develop balance. You can't develop any kind of an aesthetic. I also believe that sound is not important in music unless it is specific to the music you're playing. So just to make a beautiful sound, so-called, is not interesting. Tchaikovsky should sound different than Bach, should sound different than Xenakis, should sound different than Stravinsky.
Right.
So to be able to do that, you have to be able to hear one another, and you have to be able to realize what it is that you're going for, whether it's a string sound or a brass sound or a wind sound. So you need to have that capability. We have that now. And so not only when you rehearse, you're working towards that because you have the sound in your ear, now you have the potential to challenge people to actually reach further and aspire to something more.
Right.
So we're very lucky. But that's what I would say about being in the new hall. The new hall is like an instrument. We had to learn how to play it, but now that we have a great instrument on which to play, it makes all the difference. And for the audience, coming to the hall is a joy.
Right. Did you find that your audiences like went off the charts when you were in?
Find it.
Yeah.
They did.
Yeah.
Everybody said you're going to have a big bump in the first year, and then they're going to fall off because that's what every hall does. First 4 or 5 years, we went like this, and then we plateaued. We went down a little bit, I think, in the 6th year. We went up in the 7th, and then...
That's amazing. That's great.
Yeah, but then
Yep.
we had a really, really bad attendance for the last 15 months. I don't know why. Something happened. Maybe it was because we weren't giving any concerts. Maybe that's
yeah,
why.
maybe. You think?
That's why.
Wow.
I knew there was a reason.
Yeah,
I
and
knew
also people kind of freaked out when you started coughing on them. What's up? What's going on here? But did you? So with when I was there, other orchestras come through town pretty regularly. And, you know, whether it's the Chicago Symphony or the Berlin Philharmonic. Are you going to pour me another? He's going to pour me another. I love this. Love you, Ed. You know, I don't care what everybody else says about you. I think you're great. So anyway, so now you're sharing the same space with, I'm assuming the orchestras are still touring through Kansas City in normal times. Does that help your attendance? Does that hurt your attendance? Because I remember when another orchestra would come through town, the Kansas City audience completely sort of abandoned the symphony and went to the traveling orchestra, and then eventually came back to the symphony. Did you find that, or is it there's enough audience in Kansas City now that they are just omnivores and they'll love the Chicago Symphony when they come, and they'll also love the Kansas City Symphony when they're playing in the same space, I'm assuming?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have hard numbers, but our audience is incredibly loyal, and we've presented the Chicago Symphony and the Russian National Orchestra and the LA Philharmonic and they come to our concerts.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what we've done is create, I like to believe, I hope it's true, and I know it's true, a climate where the arts matter.
Yeah. See, I think that's the biggest change in Kansas City. When I briefly pass through every once in a while, I mean, the symphony is no longer sort of a, you know, sort of a side element. It became it really became integrated in the fabric of society, and I think that's what happened in the last 20 years while you were there. Because when I was there, the symphony didn't really quite seem to have the full community support that it needed to get it to the next level. Did you find that as well?
Well, how exactly? What do you mean?
Well, for example, one of the reasons, I just remember that the goalposts for building the new hall kept on changing because it was never considered a high enough priority throughout the entire city to make that happen. And it took leadership from Shirley and Julie Irene Kaufman and others, but it seemed to me that you know, if there were certain tax initiatives, for example, that were proposed to build the hall and that were voted down, it just never seemed that the city was behind the orchestra until recently, and under your leadership. What do you think turned that around?
First of all, if it happened under my leadership, I was just a team player. I think the arrogance of anyone saying, I did this and look what happened, is just mind-blowingly narcissistic. And in fact, one of the proudest things that I think I have done is to realize that I am privileged to be part of an extraordinary team of people.
Right.
I think I do my part in contributing, but I listen a hell of a lot more than I talk, and I talk a lot, which means I listen a lot. And really love, I really love being made better by someone else's really great insight. You
Great.
learn all the time. So in trying to get the city, I mean, I remember, you're right, I remember coming in my very first year and people were saying, I mean, I won't mention her by name because it's not polite, but the woman that we both know was instrumental in getting the project off the ground, said to me, I'm starting to have second thoughts about building this hall. Why should I build a hall where the biggest client is going to be an orchestra that's going out of business?
Right. Yeah.
And I said, I didn't hear the orchestra's going out of business. In fact, I just signed a 4-year contract, so I hope they're going out of business. I was a little offended that one of the biggest donors of the orchestra to the orchestra would be so dismissive.
Right.
And yet, that was not completely unusual.
Yeah.
And now it's unheard of.
Right. Yep.
Because success breeds success not because you can point to something on paper, but because they themselves have had the experience over these 3, 5, 10 years of knowing what a change has occurred.
Right.
And, you know, I think one of the sea changes, one of the really big perception shifts that happened was the realization on a broader level that the orchestra is not this elitist group of semi-professional or amateur people. Just they play music and that's fine, but they don't really have a real job.
Right.
I think they see the value of what this collection of artists and teachers can bring to the community. I mean, almost everybody in the Kansas City Symphony teaches.
Right.
I mean, just think of the infiltration into the next generation that level of expertise means.
Right.
And we play at ceremonial events, we play at musical events, we play at commemorative events. You know, one of the hugest ovations we ever got was when we played the national anthem before Game 6 of the Royals game at the series where we won the World Series.
Yeah.
And nobody said, who the hell are they? What? It was
Right.
and you know, other orchestras sort of copied us and they sent their brass sections. They said,
Right.
we had 60 people standing in the infield
That's awesome.
playing the Star Spangled Banner. And then the next night, Joyce DiDonato, who's a great friend and one of our hometown
Yeah.
greats, sang the national anthem. And for Kansas City to have, on 2 successive nights, their symphony orchestra and one of the most famous opera singers in the world represent their sports team hero
Yeah. Beautiful.
shows
Yeah.
the synergy that is happening in Kansas City.
Yeah.
And does it mean that everybody who came to a Royals game or a Chiefs game is a subscriber to the symphony? Sadly, no.
No, but they know you exist and they know you're important.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the fact that there are people in the orchestra who went, yay Royals, yay Chiefs, who never go or even watch a football or baseball game.
Right.
But they understand the civic pride in having a really great sports team. And I think the sports fans of Kansas City understand the civic pride of having a really great cultural, musical organization. Like they do about the Nelson Atkins, like they do about the ballet and the opera.
Right.
It's all part of the puzzle.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to go back to our chat room for one last time. When I come back, I want to talk about the third part of the piece and some of the recording that you've been doing.
Sure.
Randy Reynolds, he's a huge Ned Rorem fan, excellent composer, vocal music. Yeah, I remember I was first introduced to Ned Rorem's art songs. Brilliant, brilliant composer. Bunny Tomes and Apricot Bellini, good for you. Yummy. I love how, you know, it tells you a lot about my audience. They identify by what they're drinking. It's been a rough year, everybody. No questions for you on this time around, though. Recording. Do you find that it gives the orchestra it keeps them in touch with their best playing. It's for one thing, it's the act of recording a piece of music down, but the actual process can be splitting hairs of minutia. And do you find that the discipline of recording has dividends when you're doing live performances?
Absolutely, because it makes you listen to yourself in a different way.
Right.
Everybody likes to say we are really critical when we listen to ourselves, but I was brought up from the earliest age saying what you think you're doing is not what you're doing. You need to listen to what you're actually putting out, not what you think you're putting out.
Yeah.
Nothing does that better than a really expensive microphone in a recording session.
Right, right there. Yeah.
Which is already fraught with tension.
Right.
I mean, recording is a tense business.
When you were recording, would you put that in the piece in your regular season, or was this something that you'd pick up precisely just for recording? In other words, did you have a run at it through a concert series before recording it, or how did you
that would be
that
the
out?
ideal way. Now that we're sort of combining live performance and recordings, that's the only way to do it because of budget concerns. But the ideal recording captures a performance. You're not playing for the microphone. The microphone is capturing what you did in performance, and performance is spontaneous, and performance is about communicating with an audience. So if you go into the studio the next day, in our case, into Hellsberg Hall the next day, and you can rekindle the excitement that you had when you were playing for a live audience, then you really have something special.
Right.
Otherwise, it sounds a little artificial. Yes, I know, the Beatles worked for how many months and a year on Sgt. Pepper, but they were still, and the Rolling Stones too. But, with enough Jack Daniels, you can sound spontaneous no matter what.
Well, our motto here is the more we drink, well, the smarter we sound. But yeah, absolutely.
Right. So, but I think in general, the sacrifice of spontaneity for
precision,
the fear of not being perfect doesn't interest me.
Yeah.
So recording does make you very efficient. We were not a good recording orchestra, and now we are really good at recording orchestra.
Oh, so what's the skill? What's the missing skill? Something you have to practice, obviously. What's the X factor that makes you a good recording orchestra?
Well, first of all, just the experience of doing it, because the fear of doing it the first time is paralyzing. The second thing, and I was doing it for a long time before I came to Kansas City. I remember my first recordings when I was a kid. I mean, a kid. Now everybody's a kid to me, Tim. But I realized that the more you do something well, the more you learn from it. And if you do something badly, you still better learn from it, because then you won't do it badly the next time.
Right.
So a big factor in recording is time management. And also, you don't get many fifth chances. You always get second and maybe third chances. But if it's not there then you're running into some time problems.
Right.
So you better get it right the first 2 or 3 times you do it. And then the other thing is letting go and trusting. Like you say, okay, I know that technology can fix a lot of things after the fact, but if it's not there, ultimately it's not there. And so you have to trust that everybody is going to get there together. And the act of trusting one another, whether you're sitting in a string quartet or an orchestra or playing the piano by yourself, trusting yourself, that is really the essence of making good music.
Yeah.
Because without trust, you don't have music making. And without trust, you don't have a performance, because you have to trust that what you're giving the audience is going to land, and what you're feeling from them is true. So there's this constant vulnerability which has to be in play all the time. And that gets easier with experience. So now when we go in to make a recording, the Kansas City Symphony and I, we know we're going to come out with a good product.
Yep.
The first few times we did it was like, I really hope we come out with a good product.
Right. Yeah. Can you stay on the line? We've come up to the end of our time here, and I want to say goodbye to you properly. I'm really honored and touched that you've taken this time to say hello to me. It's been a long time, and I really appreciate it.
It has been a long time. I am really happy that you're making music matter. Listen, we all have to make music matter in the communities where we are.
Yeah.
And there is no unimportant play. You know, my father used to say, there are no unimportant notes in music. There are only unimportant musicians. And those unimportant musicians are only those who don't think music is important.
Right.
But it doesn't matter where you are or who you are. The act of making music is an act of faith. And I admire that you're still fighting the good fight.
Oh, thank you. By the way, is this still in print? Here's a time to like hawk some books here, baby.
Well, I don't know. I'm sort of embarrassed by the fact that James Levine is the author of the foreword.
Understood, but yeah.
Well, I mean, just as an explanation of that, James Levine was a teenager in Cincinnati, and his first mentor was Max Rudolph.
Max Rudolph, yeah.
So Max Rudolph would not have been tolerant of anything less than scrupulously honorable behavior. Yeah. But for better, for worse, those names, James Levine and Gunther Schuller, were musicians that were very close to Max, and they were gifted musicians.
Well, I got to say, if there's any aspiring conductors out there, this is a must-read. I mean, there is a ton of wisdom in here, so I recommend it highly. So add it to your libraries, and thank you very much for this. So with that, this camera here, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and thank you again to Maestro Micheal Stern for being my guest today. Join us again next week. And by the way, June 1st is going to be our last happy hour, but it will be our very first live event. And we can fit about 30 people in this event, so I think we have about 6 or 8 places left. So all you have to do is go online and to tickets at orchestra.iowa.org and do your RSVP. We'd love to see you live and finally see you in person. So with that, Mr. Micheal Stern, thank you very much for being my guest, and to you, we'll see you next week. Cheers.